Hey, welcome to another episode of Inquiring Minds. I am Steve Harper, and with me, as always, is the star of the show, Donna Carlin. Donna, how are you doing today?
Oh, geez, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm highly caffeinated, so buckle up.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
I don't know. I'm drinking green tea. I think that there's caffeine in that, right? I've made this switch.
It's high test.
I
Yeah.
drink copious amounts of coffee, and I have to lower it because of my blood pressure. So I've been drinking green tea, which the transition's been a lot more enjoyable than I expected it was going to be. So
Oh, good.
yeah. So, what are we talking about today? Not that anybody cares about my green tea habit now.
So it was a conversation that I had with a few of my clients this week about deciding who to hire or promote on your team,
Ooh.
or even keep on your team, and like a criteria of sorts. So it was ask yourself the following question: if everyone on this team was identical to this person in terms of their values, attitude, and professional conduct, would the culture be better or worse? If worse, you're making an exception for someone at the cost of your culture. Fix it ASAP.
Hmm.
If better, promote them as far as their skills will allow. Don't promote them beyond what their skills will allow, because then they'll tank. Right? It's that dance. You know how subject matter experts are often promoted to
Oh
leadership
yeah.
positions and they suck as leaders, but they're great as subject matter experts. So don't promote them beyond what their skill sets will allow. That's a conversation I had with a client of mine recently, because, one of his team was uh, like no end of grief from this individual because of their way of being, not because of their skills, which were phenomenal. Their way of being was incredibly detrimental
Hmm.
to morale, to his boss, because he would just publicly humiliate him in front of his boss for no reason, because he didn't like the direction he was given, things like that. Seriously, what if the whole team was like that?
Was he a top performer, or felt like he had the the ability to act like that because he's the performance of the company was so dependent on him? Or
He's not a top performer, because if he decides that that's not the way to go, he just won't do the work. So
hmm,
that's not a top performer.
no,
That's like a petulant child who thinks that it's a democracy, and if the powers that be set a direction, he has a choice whether or not he follows them.
yeah.
That is not a top performer. That is
Because
somebody.
I've seen the reverse dynamic, right, where the corporation is so committed to that individual because they are a game changer or they're a top performer, and they don't want to rock the boat by being punitive to that individual for their behavior or how they treat other people, or even how they potentially ignore direction or guidance from the leadership or management team. And because they want that the golden goose to continue to produce, right, but they don't pay attention to the overall impact that it has on the overall culture. And so that's interesting that this guy's a not the top performer, and he's still able to sort of create this kind of havoc and get away with it by not being a top performer.
Not for long. It
Yeah.
doesn't, there's only so much that somebody will take of that, no matter what your expertise is. It reminds me of Margaret Heffernan's TED Talk, what I call it, the super chicken lady,
Yeah.
talking about the pecking order at work and all these superstars who don't play well with others. That's the
Yeah.
bottom line.
Yeah.
They'll walk on somebody rather than work with somebody, and it's not sustainable.
Yep.
So, if you ask yourself that reality check question, what if everyone was like this? What would get done? How could it get done? It doesn't matter individually if they're intelligent, they have the education, the background. If they don't play well with others, you're implicating the trust of the team and the powers that be, who are looking at the manager saying,
Hmm.
why are you putting up with this crap?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if this person doesn't like what's happening, they'll just go higher and try to convince the higher ups that they're right. And that's not how an organization works. If you have opinions
Yeah.
and they're welcome, absolutely discuss your opinions. If it's not possible or feasible to implement them at this time, you still need to get the work done, and actually work with others to get the work done. If you say no, I'm not going to do it, that's not an option. I mean,
Yeah.
you're there to do a job. So
Well, and it's kind
yeah,
of interesting because the way I think you phrased it, right, was when do you know to promote this person?
that's
And
right.
I've seen that in corporations as well. I've got a troublemaker on my team, and the best way to get and deal with that troublemaker is to push
To
them over to
promote.
another team or to promote them to the next level. And I have a corporate client that I did a lot of work with pre-COVID that they're sort of known for that in their culture, right? You could be a petulant child as a manager, and somehow, some way, you always got promoted up because people didn't want to deal with you at the level you were at, and eventually, I think that you reach a ceiling in some corporations where that behavior, whether it's not tolerated any longer by the executive team, or you reach a point where it's kind of the ceiling and you can't bust through that ceiling as that individual, and so you throw your temper tantrum enough that you leave. And I think that's the strategy of the company. They promote you to the point where now you're dealing with a whole team of those people and you're the leader of it. And now if people treat, like you said, everybody like you treat them, nothing gets done and the environment is in chaos. And so a lot of those performers would just leave because they didn't like the environment, and then they go bring their drama to somebody else's company. But obviously that's not a great way to promote and foster good corporate culture, and that has a lasting effect as well for the organization, because when people know there is really no limit to how poorly your behavior can, how poorly you can perform and behave at work. There's no ramifications for that. They just promote you to not deal with you in the moment. That says a lot about the type of culture that they're developing. So I think that's kind of an interesting point. The other aspect is, why on, like you said, why on earth would you promote them if if you had now that person's leading a team of people just like them? What kind of black eye is that creating for the organization as a whole? It's an untenable situation, and it's unfortunate, but it kind of comes down to things that we've talked about before, where managers or leaders that are in those roles, they can't have those conversations, they can't communicate with those individuals because they're intimidated by those situations, and that's why that petulant behavior is allowed and why it continues to happen, because nobody stands up to them and says, that's not going to be tolerated any longer.
It's rewarding toxicity,
Yes.
and people notice. Number one. Number two, it's not always that managers are intimidated. Often they're blindsided, and they are so blindsided that they don't know how to react to something like that in the moment. And then it's too late to do something about it because the damage has been done in many ways. So that's something else to deal with. It's much more difficult to deal with that than the intimidation that you could work through, especially with a coach. Being blindsided, whole other story. You need to be able to literally dance with chaos. And some people want to have measured responses, that kind of thing. They need to think about the best approach. They don't necessarily deal with things in the absolute moment. And some of the work that I've been doing of late is to help them literally respond instantly in a way that helps delay the situations. They could think and then respond in a more fulsome way. So
So I'm curious there, let me interrupt for just a second, because I think what you just said is really powerful and will be for our audience as well. So if I happen to be a manager and I'm caught blindsided by someone's errant behavior, what do you suggest I do in the moment? If it's not a canned response, or I guess probably the thing that I'm thinking is that you've got to be aware that this could be a possibility, right? You probably,
yes.
even though we say it's blindsided, it's probably not unexpected necessarily that this could happen. So when it does occur, and we know that, I've had this individual on my team or in my department for a while, and I've been sort of lucky and skirted that there haven't been any any major skirmishes, maybe minor skirmishes. But now this is a situation that is actually, calling into question in front of other people, my integrity or my my leadership skills or whatever is bubbled up for this individual and how they're lashing out. How do you suggest that individual manager uh, respond in the moment so that you're not off the cuff and potentially allowing that situation to steamroll over you, but at the same time also getting yourself that time and space like you're mentioning to be able to come back with a more thoughtful approach to how to deal with that.
Depends on the situation. If it is something that person questions your direction publicly in front of the powers that be, the best way to be able to nip that in the bud is to use factual responses. So if somebody says, oh, I didn't do this because I didn't believe it was the best way forward, I have a better idea. So in other words, my manager's an idiot that I didn't think was the best direction. And so I am going to make them look foolish and say, I have a better idea that
Mm-hmm.
I want to act on, and totally ignore the manager and then go for what that idea is. The best way forward is for the manager to turn around and say, the direction was this, like really short and sweet. The direction was this, the purpose was this, that's all been decided. The only cog in the wheel is the fact that you have not executed on it. I need it now. No ifs, ands, or buts. And you just stop that conversation from
Mm-hmm.
happening. It's what happens is often, especially if the manager is nice, they're not going to want to cut the person at the knees. So
Yeah.
they try to partner with them and say, I understand how you feel. I understand what you're thinking. With those kinds of individuals, you have to be that elevated level and understand you're not on par. This is the hierarchy. So, in other words, it's to say, you got the direction 3 weeks ago. You don't wait until deadline until you don't give me what is needed, because that causes delay right up the board, right
Yeah.
across the organization. And there's a reason for things that is not in question. The only that is in question is, what is the reason why you have not delivered? And you throw it right back on the person. That's part of our Tongue Fu program.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about the blame game,
Mm-hmm.
is to turn it around and say, absolutely, we were ready to go as soon as you gave us this, and that is the missing piece. So you push it back on the person who didn't deliver. You don't take the blame for that person not doing the job.
Right.
And there's ways of doing that, and I teach them that. So you go to the factual base. This was the direction. You knew this was the direction. The fact that you don't feel like doing it is not up for discussion. You have until tomorrow, end of day, to get it done. So the implication is, do it, or we're going to
Or there's
find somebody who will
consequences.
do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right, because it has to get done, especially depending on, what the area is. It could be time sensitive, it could be security sensitive, it could be all
Sure.
kinds of situational things. And there are ways of dealing with it so you don't lose your temper. You stay in that leadership presence and you say, this was the direction you were given. It's not a choice whether you will do it or won't do it. If you have an opinion, we'll talk about it. This needs to get done. Do
Yeah.
it.
Well,
And
so let me
that's it.
ask you to change the situation just slightly because we talked about catching them blindsided. So let's say that same manager is promoting the strategy that they've decided that they're going to move forward, and this is the presentation to the team. This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to go about it. There wasn't a lead up or run up to this person's known about it for 3 weeks, but this is, hey, we're dropping it now, as this is our fourth quarter plan, and this is what I've decided. And you have that same individual stepping up and saying, no, this is never going to work. This idea is a bad one. I've got, I could tell you a million reasons why this is not going to work. And you and I've been in those environments where we've seen these individuals that sort of take that opportunity to grandstand and the manager is like caught like a deer in the headlights because they were expecting more of a direction conversation, and this is what we're doing, this is how we've decided. Yes, maybe I asked, are there any questions? However, this is clearly the movement that we're moving forward with. How do you expect, or what do you suggest they do to handle that situation, where it's really in the moment? You're under fire in the moment on something new that you put on the table.
I love this. I just love this. If, if it were me, this is how I respond. And this is how I work with my clients. I hear you. I absolutely hear what you're saying. Now I want exactly the same number of reasons why it will work and what you're going to do to make it work. And I want to hear everybody's opinion about how you're going to collectively make it work. Let's go. Let's craft something. Then if there's anything broken or anything that, is a roadblock,
Yeah.
we'll discuss the roadblock. This blanket is never going to work. Nothing, I shouldn't say nothing. Most things don't not work. In other words, 100%. Something, I mean, there's a reason why that manager and probably the powers that be in the organization came up with this is the direction we're taking.
Yeah.
If they're missing a step or whatever, this is the opportunity, guys, for you to tell me what step's missing. But that doubting Thomas kind of person, I
Mm-hmm.
did this with so many workshops where we had to change ownership of projects and stuff like that. And people want to hold on to that which was their territory before. You know what that's like.
Oh yeah.
And, no, I'm not letting go. No, they're not going to do it right. Like all of the same things. And I hear you and you're listening and you're saying, I hear you because you're hearing them. So that piece of it is what are the nuggets that that person's saying, the unintended message, so to speak, that you could actually listen to and consider because it might have validity.
Yeah.
If it's one of these people that are stuck, they just don't want to do it, never going to work. I like the old way better. And there's a lot of people like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the answer. I literally hear you. Now I want all of you collectively to put your heads together to tell me how it will work, how it will be successful, and how you will execute on it so it will be. And you change the energy. And every time it goes into, nah, it's never going to work. We had this discussion before. I want you to take your smarts and all your past experience and let me know in what way will it work and what will it mean when it does. So you attach meaning to that. And
Yeah.
you will turn that around. If you can't, and that person is continuously stuck and always stuck and doesn't like change, that's a whole different conversation. For the most part, it really does work. Because what you're doing is saying, I know you're smart enough to figure this out, how we can implement it in the way that needs to be implemented, rather than just say, throwing everything out, nothing makes sense. How will it make sense? How
Yeah.
will it work? And you just invite them to start creating.
I like that. I like that a lot. I tend to, I equate a lot of those sort of individuals in the corporate world as very similar to the schoolyard bullies, right? And how did you take the power away from the bully in the schoolyard? Their power comes from being jointly on stage with the person that they're victimizing. And when you see it in corporations, the bully behavior and mentality is very similar in that they're trying to make the manager, the person of authority, look and feel small in the moment, right? And if they can do that, the power comes from the audience that you give them. And if you're a leader that runs into a situation like this with, an individual that you are being challenged by, I think obviously everything that Donna is saying is phenomenal, and I think certainly works in a collaboration. I had one environment where I was working with someone, and I said, one of the things that you do is just say, look, this is not up for discussion. At the end of the day, I have a direction that I'm giving, and I'm certainly open to having a conversation offline with you, but I'm not going to waste everybody else's time with the back and forth. And you simply get up. and or it's the equivalent of the hand, like, look, stop, appreciate it, thank you, however, this is where we're going, what we're doing. And to your point, I'd like you to utilize that brain power of yours because you've got experience and knowledge that's certainly valuable to us, and so help put that energy towards why it will work versus why it won't. and, come back to me with some ideas, but limiting that conversation from becoming a debate, or giving that bully the audience to excel off that energy to make that leader feel even smaller than they may in the moment. And that can be tough. It can be really tough, especially in today's world where we are trying to promote a culture of collaboration. We're trying to promote, a culture of teamwork and mutual value and input. But at some point, there is a hierarchy. And I think at that point, when you get blindsided, you have to be very calm in the moment. You have to be very cautious with the words that you use, but you also have to be very intentional about what you have put forward and on the table. And, if it's not the appropriate time to have that debate or discussion, then you have to just pretty much end it as quickly as you possibly can, as respectfully as you can. But you got to almost punch that bully back in the nose and take that power away.
Yeah, exactly right. It's I love how you said a person of authority to look and feel small. That's their purpose.
That is.
That's
And
what.
it happens in organizations of all sizes. There is almost always going to be someone that is in that sort of bully mindset. And that's where I generally coach my leaders. You haven't done a good enough job getting to know that person. You haven't taken the time to connect, because that person has something broken inside of them. And although it's not your job necessarily to fix it, sometimes it is the opportunity to fix the environment and say, look, you've obviously been rejected. You've had challenges in your other roles, or nobody listens to you, or you feel like you have to be the loudest voice in the room. And I want you to know you've got an audience with me when we can have a respectful conversation, but you have great input and value, and your experience brings a lot of significant opportunities to the table for us to co-collaborate. But I want you to be aware there is a hierarchy relative to how we work, or the organization and how it functions, and there's a reason for that. And so trying to find a way to be able to get a little bit on the same side of the desk with them. I find that, it's interesting. I'm this is completely, kind of a little bit off track in terms of the conversation, but one of the people that I just absolutely could not stand in high school, just absolutely disliked this guy because he was a bully and worked in
Oh wow.
intimidation.
Yeah.
I just started showing him kindness in my senior year. He was a year older than me. And no matter what he did, whatever he threw at me, I came back with something kinder. I always complimented him. I always had, something positive to say around him. And most of the time it was rebuffed, right? It takes time, but one thing connected. And then next thing I know, that started a conversation. That conversation turned out to be a second conversation. And now this guy checks in with me probably daily, because he was in an environment where he grew up, where bully behavior was tolerated. It was almost promoted because of his family
Hmm.
environment. But he comes back to me in situations where he knows in work that he's starting to tend back towards that behavior. And he needs that mental check in with me to say, okay, am I doing it? Yeah, absolutely. You're definitely doing it. Or this is why you're getting the response that you're getting, and why things are not being as, the outcomes are not quite as successful as they could be. So let's reconstruct that. But what I've actually found is you can get a lot of those people that have that antagonistic bully kind of behavior in a corporation. If you're willing to be, as a leader, invest in them, you'll have an opportunity to turn some of those around. And if not, you're going to make it very uncomfortable for them to want to stay.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So this conversation could probably go on for a month because there's
Yes,
so much.
it could. It could. We might have to just do a webinar on this one, because this is such a. I think there are a lot of people, and I'm just as guilty, right? At some point, you, as a leader, you often find that, especially in today's world where we started, like, how do you keep these people, right? Because in a workforce where right now you
Yeah.
have the workers actually kind of have the upper hand, right? So there's this very unique anatomy of how things are working in businesses today that are a little bit different than they even were 5 years ago. But at the end of the day, I think leaders need to be consciously thinking about these things, prepping themselves for these situations, which is why I love these conversations that we have, because we put these topics out there to get people thinking and really experiencing it, even if it's just in their own mind or through their own dialogue with their family members or their friends or their colleagues, how these, questions and these scenarios bubble up and how they may respond or react to them in real life, because they probably will come up, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For
So this
sure.
one ran way longer than our normal episode, but it was such such a
Yeah.
fascinating. So we apologize to our audience, but this was just so good. You just couldn't cut it off. It's, like I said, we may have to actually, roll this into some sort of webinar, maybe at least have a part 2 on this. But Donna, how do people share what their thoughts are on this topic, and, maybe what they heard, or how they might leverage some of the strategies or ideas that they discovered today, or how they've endured some of these situations themselves. We'd love to hear some of those experiences as well. How can they put that information in front of us and become part of the conversation?
Join our Facebook group, Inquiring Minds with Donna Carlin and Steve Harper, and let us know what you think, what you've experienced, how you're using some of the topics that we're bringing forth. You could get us on our website, Steve's at ripplecentral.com. I'm at Donna Carlin with a K.com. And you could find all our social media links, through our websites as well, and what we post. I tend to be more of a LinkedIn poster than anything else, but we do respond, to comments on our YouTube channel, which you could subscribe to, or our Facebook. And we want to hear from you. And
Yes.
we're absolutely open to having the conversations you want us to have. So let us know what those are.
Absolutely. Well, Donna, thanks for another enjoyable conversation. This was a fun one for sure. There's a lot more probably to continue on this, and so we will revisit this at some point in a future episode, I'm sure. But I hope you have a fantastic day. Have no conflict whatsoever with anybody,
You too.
and just go have a great day.
You as well.
All right, we'll
Speak
talk to
soon.
you next week.